Hello, and welcome to a video presentation on adding and subtracting fractions. Here's what you'll learn: how to add and subtract fractions with like and unlike denominators. Let's start with adding and subtracting fractions with like denominators. Adding and subtracting fractions is easiest when the fractions have common or the same denominators. If your fractions have common denominators, here's what you do to solve those problems. Step 1. Add or subtract the numbers in the numerators to get the numerator of your answer. Step 2. Use the common denominator as the denominator of your answer. And step 3. We always reduce our fractions to their simplest form. Let's look at some examples now of adding and subtracting fractions with like denominators. Let's add 3/7 and 2/7 together and express the answer in simplest form. First, write down the problem. So I'll write down 3/7 plus 2/7. Since both denominators are the same, both are 7, that means we can add the numerators together right now, the 3 and the 2. That's going to give us 5, and 5 will be the numerator of our answer. And we use the common denominator 7 as the denominator of our answer. Now take a look at 5/7. Can we reduce that fraction? Since there are no factors other than 1 in common with the numerator 5 and the denominator 7, our answer is already in simplest form. So the answer is 5/7. Let's subtract 14/15 minus 2/15. Start by writing down the problem: 14/15 minus 2/15. Again, since both denominators are the same, 15 this time, that means we can subtract the numerators right now, the 14 minus 2. That's going to give us 12, and that'll be the numerator in our answer. We use the common denominator 15 as the denominator of our answer. Now take a look at that fraction, 12/15. Can it be reduced? 12/15 can be reduced. Both numbers have a factor in common, and that factor is 3. So we're going to reduce the fraction to simplest form by dividing both the numerator and denominator by the factor 3. 12 divided by 3 will give us 4, so our new numerator number is 4. 15 divided by 3 is 5, so our new denominator is 5, and that's the answer, 4/5. Now let's add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. If the fractions you are adding and subtracting have different or unlike denominators, you need to find a common denominator. And I'm going to show you two methods for finding a common denominator. Method 1, we're going to find the least common multiple of our denominators. That method is my favorite. So if you're not familiar with finding a least common multiple of 2 or more numbers, you may wish to view my video titled Least Common Multiple. Method 2, we can multiply the unlike denominators together. That will always give us a common denominator, however it may not give us the least common multiple common denominator. Let's look at some examples of adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. Let's add 3/4 and 5/12 together. First, we're going to write down the problem: 3/4 plus 5/12. Now, the denominators are different. They're 4 and 12. That means that we can't add the numerators 3 and 5 together. We have to find a common denominator. Now, method 2, we could multiply the 4 and the 12 together and use 48 as a common denominator. But that would mean we'd have to find equivalent fractions with 48 as our denominator for both fractions. Now, I prefer to use the least common multiple method, and here's why. It's less prone to error because the numbers in our fractions generally tend to be smaller, and in many cases we only have to change the numbers in one of the fractions. In fact, the problem here is one where we're only going to change one fraction. Now, to find the least common denominator, ask yourself this question: will the smaller number denominator, in this case the 4, divide evenly into the larger number denominator, 12? If so, we can use the larger number denominator as our common denominator. For our problem, the answer is yes. 4 does divide evenly into 12, so we're going to use 12 as our common denominator. And that means we only have to change the first fraction into an equivalent fraction with 12 as its denominator. We'll be able to leave 5/12 as it is. Now, in order to turn 3/4 into a fraction with 12 in the denominator, that means we have to multiply the 4 by 3. So let's go ahead and set up our fraction with 12 in the denominator. And to get an equivalent fraction, we also have to multiply the numerator 3 by 3, which gives us a new numerator of 9. So 3/4 and 9/12 are exactly the same fraction. Now we can add the 5/12 to the 9/12. Since we have a common denominator, we can go ahead and add 9 and 5 together. That gives us 14 in the numerator. And of course our common denominator is 12. Now take a look at 14/12. Can we reduce that? Our fraction can be reduced. We can divide top and bottom by 2. 14 divided by 2 gives us 7, and 12 divided by 2 gives us 6. So our reduced fraction would be 7/6. Now this is an improper fraction. We should always turn improper fractions into a mixed number. So let's go ahead and do that. 6 divides into 7 one time with a remainder of 1. So we're going to have an answer of 1 and 1/6. Now let's subtract 1/3 minus 3/7. Again, we'll express the answer in simplest form. We start by writing down the problem. 1/3 minus 3/7. Again, the denominators are different. They're 3 and 7. We can't subtract the numerators until we get a common denominator for both fractions. Now, let's find the least common denominator of 3 and 7. Does 3 divide evenly into 7, the smaller number into the larger number? The answer is no. So here's what we're going to do. Now we're going to look at the next multiple of the larger number, the 7, which is 14. So we're going to turn 7 into a 14. Now, does 3 divide evenly into 14? Again, no it doesn't. So let's look at the next multiple of 7. That's going to be 21. Now, does 3 divide evenly into 21? In fact, it does. So 21 is going to be the denominator of our two equivalent fractions. So let's go ahead and set those up with a 21 in the denominator to start. Now for the first fraction, we multiply the denominator 3 by 7 to get 21. So to get an equivalent fraction for 1/3, we have to multiply the numerator 1 by 7 as well. That's going to give us 7/21 for the first fraction. For the second fraction, we multiply the denominator 7 by 3 to get 21. So to get an equivalent fraction for that one, we have to multiply the numerator 3 by 3 as well, and that's going to give us 9/21. Now we can go ahead and subtract the numerators because we have a common denominator. And 7 minus 9 gives us -2. And of course our common denominator is 21, so that will be the denominator in our answer. And the fraction is already in simplest form, so our answer is -2/21. Now let's wrap up this presentation with a word problem. One recipe for brownies calls for 1/2 cup of sugar. Another recipe calls for 2/3 cup of sugar. How much more sugar does the second recipe call for? Well, first we need to have an expression that we can solve. Since we're looking for the difference between two fractions, we know our expression is going to be a subtraction problem. And we find differences by taking the larger number, in this case the 2/3, and subtracting the smaller number, the 1/2. Now, since the denominators are different, they're 3 and 2, we can't subtract the numerators yet. We have to find a common denominator. Let's find the least common denominator of 3 and 2. Does 2 divide evenly into 3? Well, no, it doesn't. So let's look at the next multiple of 3 by turning 3 into a 6. Does 2 divide evenly into 6? Yes, it does. So 6 will be the denominator for our equivalent fractions. So let's go ahead and set that up right now. First fraction with a 6 as a denominator, and the second fraction will have 6 as a denominator. Now for the first fraction, we multiplied the denominator 3 by 2 to get 6. So to get an equivalent fraction, we have to multiply the numerator 2 by 2 as well, and that's going to give us 4. For the second fraction, we multiply the denominator 2 by 3 to get 6. So to get an equivalent fraction, we have to multiply the numerator 1 by 3 as well, and that's going to give us a 3. Now we can subtract our numerators. 4 minus 3 is 1, and the denominator then is 6. So that's our answer. The second recipe calls for 1/6 cup more sugar than the first. Now I've got one final thought on adding and subtracting fractions I'd like to share with you. When adding and subtracting more than 2 fractions, it's easier to work with just 2 fractions at a time. What you have to do, though, is follow the order of operations. Remember, we work addition and subtraction problems in order from left to right to get the correct answer. Congratulations! You've learned how to add and subtract fractions with like and unlike denominators.